guys, welcome back to Goodbye Grains. Today we are going to be making a Spanish kind of stew braise. And the reason I call it a stew braise, I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to title this video. And the reason for that is because this dish really is kind of in between a stew and a braise. Stews are normally have a decent amount of broth. It's much closer to a soup, but a very thick soup. This is more like a braise where you are going to use stew meat, but you kind of half submerge the meat. So you'll kind of understand what I mean as I go through the ingredients and as we make this dish. But either way, it is awesome. It's one of my new favorite ways to use beef. You can kind of make it ahead of time and then eat it later on. If you are going to do that, I would say that the last step where you're adding kind of the parsley and the almonds, don't do that until right before you're going to serve it. So let's take a look at our ingredients. Okay, so we have our stew meat. This is about 2 to 2.5 pounds of grass-fed beef stew meat. We have our tomato and our onion. Now our onion I chopped pretty finely, almost to a mince. And then the tomato, this is actually the inside of just regular tomatoes. I kind of squeezed out all of the liquid and put it in here, and then tried to keep as much of just the pulp and the other just inside of the tomato. Now these two ingredients we're gonna cook down for about 30 to 40 minutes before we even begin the rest of the stew. And the reason for that is we really wanna develop some flavor, and so you kinda wanna keep the moisture as low as possible in here, and then we'll add in the actual liquid from the tomato later. Now for our spices, we have a bay leaf and a cinnamon stick, along with some smoked paprika and some kosher salt and pepper. We have some coconut oil. Now the coconut oil is what I'm going to cook the onion and the tomato in. Now those are the main ingredients that are kind of going to be in the stew from the beginning. Now after that, towards the end of cooking, we're going to add in some baby mushrooms. Now these I'm going to chop up, and these are baby portobellos. Any kind of mushrooms that you like, you can definitely use, but these mushrooms are going to be added towards the end of cooking. And then once the stew is finished, we're going to kind of create this parsley, almond, garlic kind of mixture that's we're gonna just throw into the food processor, break down a little bit. And so for that, we're gonna use some slivered almonds. We can toast these up to add a little bit more flavor, some parsley and some fresh garlic, and we're gonna use a little bit of olive oil to kind of get that process going, and then just kind of finish it with a little bit of red wine vinegar at the very, very end. Now the broth we're going to be using to kind of supplement this liquid to actually make the stew. Now this is not the traditional stew in the sense that it has a ton of liquid with, you know, some vegetables and some meat in it, almost closer to a soup. This is definitely closer to almost like a beef braise, or something that has a much thicker consistency without adding any flour or any other types of thickeners. So the first thing we need to do is cook down these vegetables, and then we're going to be ready to assemble. Okay, so I cooked the onion and the tomato on the stovetop for about 30 minutes, and then I used the leftover tomato juices to help scrape up all the brown bits that are on the bottom. So I have all that flavor in here. So now what we're going to do is add in our seasoning. So we can actually hold on to the cinnamon stick and the bay leaf and kind of put those off to the side, and then dump in the kosher salt, the paprika, and the pepper. And we can kind of just mix that all together. And then we can start adding in our broth. Now we're gonna just first add in about a cup to a cup and a half first, and then just stir this around. You want to stir kind of slowly so you're not sloshing the broth all over the place. And now at this point, what we're gonna do is add in our beef. And now this is a lot different from a regular beef stew where normally you brown the beef first. This one we actually allow the oven to help brown the beef, and so it's actually a lot closer to a braise than a regular beef stew, and that is because we are going to allow the liquid to only come to about halfway up around the sides of the beef. And so that's why you only want to add about a cup to a cup and a half of your broth in the beginning, because depending on how large your pot is, you're going to add in a certain amount of broth. So we can just kind of evenly disperse the meat. And then once all the meat is in here, if you have any leftover juices from the beef, like I do, that you can kind of see in here, you can just add those into the pan as well. And so you kind of just want to lightly press down, and as you can see, my liquid actually already comes up halfway, so I don't need to add any additional broth. If you're using a lot more like narrow or a lot smaller of a pan where your beef kind of is almost stacking on top of one another, you can add a little bit of additional broth, but I would definitely recommend using a wider one so that you can kind of evenly disperse your beef. Now you can just kind of tuck your cinnamon stick in here along with your bay leaf. If your bay leaf breaks, it's not a big deal. And so now at this point, we're going to pop this into a 300-degree oven. Now you don't want to cover it, and the reason for that is you want to have the oven brown the top of your beef while carefully cooking the actual meat underneath. And so this is going to take about an hour. Okay, so while our stew is finishing cooking, we're gonna make the additional kind of ingredients that we're going to put into the stew right before we serve it. So we have the parsley is already washed and in our food processor. I just toasted our almonds. What I usually do is just spread them out on a pan and just pop it into the oven while the stew is cooking. You just wanna keep an eye on it and only let it be in there for about 5 minutes or so. You definitely don't want these to burn. Then we have our couple of cloves of fresh garlic. And then we're gonna do about a tablespoon or two of olive oil. And then we can put our lid on and we are just going to pulse this until it's broken down. So you'll only want to do about 8 to 10 pulses. And as you can see, the almonds have broken down and so has the parsley, and then the garlic is evenly dispersed. So we can put this aside and add it right when our stew is ready. All right, so I just pulled the stew out of the oven, and now I had it in there for an hour of just the beef, and then I took it out, stirred it around, added the mushrooms, and then put it back into the oven for another 45 or 50 minutes until the beef is nice and tender. So now what we can do is take out the cinnamon and the bay leaf. Just put these off to the side. And then we can add in our parsley, almond, and garlic mixture. You can just add all that right in. And then a splash or so of red wine vinegar, about a teaspoon or two. And then we can stir this all together. At this point, you can give it a taste and add any additional salt or pepper that you want, and it's ready to serve. So this is another one of those perfect dishes for company. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I usually do not eat mushrooms. If they're in a dish and we're out to dinner, I'll kind of like push them off to the side. I think it's maybe a texture thing, but I actually really like the mushrooms in this dish. You can't even tell just because of all the other flavors that are going on, but it kind of adds a nice like extra like meaty texture to the entire, stew braise. So I hope you guys will give this a shot and let me know what you think. See you guys next week. Bye.